Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, the Crypto Hipster, Jamil Hassan, where I bring you founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders in crypto and blockchain from around the world. And today, I have an amazing guest. Actually, he was an amazing guest last January, and he still is. His name is Marc Mercuri. He is the head of blockchain at Shrapnel. I interviewed him in January, and I'm happy to interview him again today. Marc, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to be back.
It's great to have you. So, for those of the people who didn't hear our first interview, could you tell us about your background and if it's a logical background, what you're doing now?
Yeah, you bet. So I was a startup guy that went to Microsoft and ended up staying there for about 18 years. So I was basically an early stage technology guy. I led their blockchain products and launched in a very short period of time. We launched Azure Blockchain Service, which was basically nodes as a service, Azure Blockchain Tokens, which was a token service, tools integration. So with Visual Studio Code, we integrated Truffle, which was the number one tool at the time. And then we also integrated low code, no code into the Power Platform. So you could start integrating this, like business people could easily start integrating it in. So I did that for a while. And then there was crypto winter, and I went and launched some low code tools for Microsoft called Dataverse during the pandemic, and did some help with pandemic relief in terms of building systems for state governments and things like that for the company as part of their relief effort. And then I decided that I wanted to go back into the crypto space. I knew Joe Lubin, so called him and ended up becoming the SVP of developers over at ConsenSys. So looking at things like Infura, development tools, Azure Blockchain Service became Forum Blockchain Service. So we moved my customers from Microsoft over to there, as well as, Truffle and Diligence and other tools that were there. Launched a token service there, did a lot of work with them, looking at sort of future models, and then got a call to come to this place called Shrapnel, where I was really super interested in gaming. Because gaming is taking Web3 and applying it to a world. So it's not just a game. There's supply chain, there's marketplaces, there's all sorts of different scenarios that were there. And the team they had here is basically a who's who of different games that they've worked on. From Halo and BioShock, Call of Duty, even casual favorites like Plants vs Zombies. So it's pretty awesome. So I joined before I left the parking lot. And have really been building out a platform for them over the last year. I joined actually last year and a half. And so the thing that's great is that you've got people, if you think about those games I just mentioned, they're people that they're games that really push the envelope. And so we started looking at how we were going to deal with helping people buy, create, sell, own, and have agency with their assets with blockchain. That I said, forget what's out in the market, just tell me what it is that you want, right? Because I'd launched a couple of token services before, so like the hard stuff, like I'd figured out the first level hard stuff, and so it's like, hey, just what would you like to see? And so we've been building that out, and so now it's real and it's showing up in aspects of the game, but that's and you'll see more about it. I'm sure we'll talk more about it over the course of the discussion today. But that's a little bit of background on me. So yeah, so I was an early stage blockchain guy, startup guy with lots of blockchain in different areas.
Awesome. Awesome. So, yes, we are going to talk about the games. Actually, Shrapnel has a new game platform called GameBridge, right? And I'm really interested to know about that one. Could you please walk us through GameBridge, how it works, and why the gaming community should love it?
Yeah, I mean, so let's start with the basic problem space. If you think about it, in gaming in general, right? People have been buying digital currency for a very long time. They've been buying coins or Robux or V-Bucks or those sorts of things. And they've been buying assets for a long time. They've been buying skins and other items that are there. Sometimes you can't sell those assets, right? So a great story for me is I had let's tell you two quick stories. So one is my son was a Fortnite player early on, but he was under the age limit, right? And so he said, "Dad, can I use your account?" Like, sure. He bought tons of skins during this time, like way more than he probably should have, but he bought a lot. And he's like, "Hey, you know what? I'm now old enough to have my own account. Can we just sort of move these over?" And we contacted our friends at Fortnite, and they're like, "No, it doesn't work that way." And so like he bought these things, but he didn't really own them, right? And so that's one example. It's like, hey, that's not right. Like I'm paying money for currency and I'm buying these things, but I don't have them. Another example, also Fortnite related with my son, is that the Samsung had released with their with one of their new Galaxy Note phones when the Note was new. It's like you can get the exclusive Galaxy skin for Fortnite. So my son's like, hey, like, Dad, I'd really like to get this skin and whatever. I'm like, dude, I just bought a phone. Like, I'm not going to spend $1,000 to get you a skin. But at the time I worked at Microsoft, and I'm like, I know there's a bunch of people here who probably bought this phone because a bunch of techies buying the latest and greatest, right? That have no idea what Fortnite is and probably don't care. And so I found someone, he's like, yeah, I don't know what this thing is. And like, I'll gladly take your $50 for the skin, right? And it was Christmas time, like, sure, we'll get that for him. And but the exchange process for that, so this guy basically was entitled to a digital asset, but for him to sell it, I had to meet him in a bagel shop in Bellevue, which is just outside Seattle. I had to give him $50. He handed me his phone. I had to log into his phone with my account. It registered that it was on his phone, and then I could get the Galaxy skin. It was like, super cumbersome. And if you think about what a lot of people do is they'll do these gray market sites where if you look on eBay, people will sell you their account and they'll sort of do something that's not great. And so even if you think about the creation of Ethereum, Vitalik said, one of the reasons he sort of started that is World of Warcraft. He bought something and realized he didn't really own it, right? So the reason why is like, hey, like we like to enable ownership, like true ownership and portability and things like that. So there's this underlying thing, and then also if you're a creator, how to like monetize the work that I do, right? And not just in in-game currency, but let me take it out of the game. And if I create assets, can I create those assets and bring them to other games and other marketplaces and sell them there? So can I expand my audience beyond your game? So imagine like you created these really cool decals, but you had to create them like in the Forza Deliver editor, and you created them in our editor and someplace else. Well, you got to create a bunch of things a bunch of different times. Wouldn't it be great if you were a creator to be able to have this asset and take it to a bunch of different places? So like the benefit for that is real. Same thing with in-game currencies, right? And so like if the currency is, if I bought V-Bucks, and a lot of times your pricing is tied, or V-Bucks, Robux, whatever, but a lot of times the pricing of things is like you have just enough to buy what you want plus a little bit extra, and you always have a little bit extra, right? And so like that just goes unused. So what if I could take that and send it to someone else or sell it to someone else if I'm not going to use it? Or like, you get bored with the game. Like you've completed it, you've done all the missions, you've got all the achievements, like you've made all these investments in assets. Could I sell them to someone else or trade them or do something like that? So there's a bunch of things there, I think, around agency where from like a player and creator perspective, there's a lot of interest. I think from a game perspective, there's also the opportunity, and for creators, there's also the ability to do royalties. And so, hey, let's make sure if it gets sold that I can get royalties. We'll talk about skins and how we can remix things in a second. But like if someone takes my thing and incorporates into something else, then I should get money for that, which is kind of interesting. And then from a game perspective, like if you're providing the infrastructure to do all this, is it fair for you to get some royalty for some of the things by giving people tools for free? And so it's one of those things that if you do it the right way, like it benefits the game, it benefits the player, it benefits the creator, and everybody has agency to do really cool things. So like from that perspective, you've got sort of value for everyone, which is always really good. But then the next thing you've got to think about is like, well, how do I go do that? And so if you think about Web3 games, and they're getting better now, but in the early days, you had people that knew Web3 but not gaming. And so you had bad games, but with good connectivity. You had some games that were good, but they didn't have like the learning curve for Web3 is just still difficult for a lot of folks. Like I joke, I spent a lot of my career in early stage technology. And I would say that people who are involved in early stage tech like have a high threshold for pain and a lot of religion, right? Because you really have to have that if you're going to deal with something that's constantly changing and where it's poorly documented. And because there was so much money in decentralized finance with Web3, there's just tons of companies coming into the space. So you have lots of things that are evolving independently, coming out. Things are dying, things are growing. So it's a rapidly growing ecosystem that's in with a lot of acceleration. And so if you think about like, okay, for people who know how to build games and they want to involve assets and agencies, it's just really difficult, right? And because like the people who know the stuff really well, really expensive, hard to find, a lot of them, if you want to do, because some studios like to have people local, like a lot of them won't move to where you're at, right? So unless you're in like Miami or New York or like one of these hubs, it doesn't work out really well for you for getting staff. And then anytime that you're spending learning how to do this stuff, you're not spending time on the game. Like the big thing for games is you want to focus on the fun, right? And so like I have a slide when I talk to people about this, I call it like the alphabet soup of Web3, right? So you've got like ERCs and EICs and and ZK and a bunch of other things. And then there's tokenomics and understanding how things will work, so on and so forth. And so for them, the goal is like, if you say, hey, would you like to enable the things I talked about a minute ago? The answer is yes. And like, why don't you do it? And it's like, well, it's either it's too hard, so people just don't do it, or they try and fail a lot, right? And so if you think about what we're doing stuff that's much more advanced than anything that's out there. And we can talk about that. And we decided, like literally during my interview, like, hey, like if we do this, it's going to apply to a lot more people and a lot more games. We have to make a decision on day one if it's going to be a platform we're going to offer some to other people. And we said we would. And so basically the goal is that if of GameBridge and why game developers want to use it is you're going to get a lot of advanced behaviors, and we can talk about those. But at the end of the day, you don't need to understand much about Web3. Like if you think about the things there people want to understand, it's things around wallets and items and inventory. And items can have, like, we've got 18 different types of behaviors where things can be composable and rechargeable and consumable and bundleable and things like that. But we basically do all the heavy lifting for you, and you can just add it to your game. And so because it's written by a game company, it really has a bunch of nuances that you really only think about if you're a game company. And so whether it's nuances of how you handle things like loadout and inventory and crafting and those sorts of things, we've got it sort of all in the box. And so instead of having to understand like all the alphabet soup of Web3, you can basically say like weapon.parts.add, and now you've got a weapon that you've created with multiple NFTs that are part of it. So you can have like a weapon that has 4 different parts, and those parts can have skins, and they can also have stickers that are on top of those skins. And we do all the heavy lifting for you. So we've come up with a game item smart contract. We do like the deployment, things like that for you behind the scenes, and solved a bunch of really hard problems. Like if you think about a free-to-play game, right? And you want to run it on a network, well, there's gas fees, right? And there's also how are you going to think about doing that? And so we've worked with partners like with great examples with Avalanche and with Layer Zero. And so with Avalanche, we've worked on it. So we have a subnet, so you have dedicated traffic, so you can handle the throughput of a free-to-play game. And we were able to divorce the gas token from the utility token. So that means that the gas for us is effectively free, right? And so with that, it allows us to handle free-to-play players, where if I was on a mainstream L1, I'm going to have to pay out for all these other players in whatever the native token is. And the native token is not free. So there's a cost. The cost per user for a game is much higher. And if you think about some of the main networks, you're going to have people that are deploying stuff on Ethereum, where the other day I just saw like a massive hike in gas fees for a certain period of time. So it's much harder for people to figure out how to like estimate their costs for a game, where we've done it with the subnet is there. So I just said a lot. I'm going to take a beat, but if I were to do like the TLDR is ownership and agency for both creators and for the gamers is something that people want. Games are looking for ways to enable that at low cost with low distraction. And also, if it enables them to monetize in a way that's fair and reasonable, all the better. To do that is very complex, requires a lot of intimate knowledge that is rare and expensive to get. And we basically say, okay, we're going to give that to you in a box that makes it really easy for you, traditional game developer to plug in and be successful, and not have to compromise with just sort of what's out there.
You did throw a lot of technical stuff at me. You also threw at me focus on the fun, which I think is the title of our first podcast together.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the agency though. Developers, builders, creators of the games, right? How can these developers create games and gaming experiences that historically have been complicated and expensive, but use Web3, and bypass, I guess, the fees part of it, or however, and make that, make those experiences, easier and simple and fun.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, here's the great thing about gaming and Web3, right? They already know about digital currency because they've been selling it for ages, right? They already know about digital assets because they've been selling them for ages, right? And so the key thing is how do you take the Web3 world, which allows you to put something on a blockchain, which means it's transparent. We also make it what we call bridgeable, and bridgeable will allow you to take the assets that you buy in our game or with GameBridge to other platforms, right? So you can go from our subnet, which gives us all the benefits we talked about, but suppose you've got something that's now worth $100,000, as you saw in like CS:GO. You could take it to Ethereum, maybe get use it as a mortgage to get a mortgage for your apartment or something, right? And so the key thing there is that game developers can get all the capabilities that they want, but with GameBridge, they don't have to work with anything exotic, right? So if you have a wallet today that holds your coins, we have wallets functionality that's there. And we have both custodial and non-custodial wallets that we make that really seamless. And so when you like log into Shrapnel, you have a wallet. You don't necessarily know whether it's a custodial wallet or a non-custodial wallet, but if you have non-custodial wallets, you can add them. So you like meet people where they are, but so you've got wallets. And so we have, wallet capability. And then the items in your game, you want to be able to define what they are and how you use them and how they can be searched and things like that. And so we have a game item that, can handle everything from a call sign to a battle pass. Call sign's like your gamer tag, to a battle pass, to weapons and those sorts of things. And you can do things where you have, what would normally be complicated, right? If you said, hey, I want to build a weapon, and that weapon has like a muzzle and a receiver and a scope and that sort of stuff. Well, those are all individual NFTs. And so we make it so you can just say, hey, I have a definition of what this thing is and what's a part of it, right? And so you're just describing it, and we can handle creating all the stuff on the chain for you. And then you want to be able to bring that back through your inventory, either directly or through, in games, you use what's called a gaming backend. And so there are companies like a Pragma or PlayFab or Excelbyte and those sorts of things where you configure a lot of stuff about your game and you do multiplayer and things like that. So a lot of times they'll do inventory. And so one is, if I'm already using this thing, how do I plug into those things? So we'll make it easy to plug into there. So if you know how to build a game already, it's taking wallets and inventory and items and other things and sort of plugging them into the things that you already know in a really easy way. But if you have these high level artifacts that they already know, again, wallets and items and inventory and crafting, and effectively you're providing plugins to the way that they know how to work and the tools that they already work in. So it's just like clicking. It's not as simple as clicking a checkbox, but it's a couple lines of code, and you'll be able to add most things in the platform.
So I want to talk about your son a little bit. Go back to that conversation. He obviously created, player created content, right? So, and I played games where I created the content and I thought I had owned it too, and I didn't. But what's the future and the evolution of player created content, especially in Web3, look like, in the gaming space, and what challenges or obstacles remain to, for achieving, that growth or, transformation?
It's a great question. And so it's something we spend a lot of time on Clearly, right? And so the key thing is you want to take a creator first approach, right? And so like, hey, how can I help this person? Because if you have more creators, and part of that is helping them get connected with the most players, then you're going to have a really robust community of people that are creating content and distributing content, right? And so if we look at like how we create content, we want to make sure that the tools are really easy. And then, making sure that when you create something, there's a license attached to it. So you have control over who can do what with it, which is really important, right? Sometimes you want to make sure that it's not used in third-party games. It's not used in different types of games. It's not used in other places where you might have licenses that you sell things where it can be used in media. So a lot of people will do like recordings in like Unreal Engine and things like that. So you might want to say, if you're creating a character, there might be things around that. So you give them the ability to specify a license that's for it. You give them the ability to create something that can be brought to any chain that they care about, right? And so that's where we use bridging with Layer 0 in our contracts to allow you to take it from, we start in our subnet, but you could bring it to Ethereum or you bring it to Avalanche C or other networks, is really important. The other thing is making sure that you provide the right information in the public metadata. So we look at like public metadata and private metadata, right? And so the public metadata are things that help inform people what this thing can actually go do. And it will work with we have our own marketplace, but if you take it someplace else, you bring it to OpenSea or something else that knows how to work with items, that should just work. So just make sure that like the metadata is compatible with where you want to take it. And also making sure that part of that metadata identifies what the status is of an item, right? And so if you created something that is not available to be used in a game, maybe you were able to mint something and get it through the filters that has like hate speech or things that are in there, maybe like a swastika or something. You want to make sure that people understand this thing that I'm buying may not be actually be able to be used, right? And so understanding like what's the applicability of what I have here. The other thing is, we talk about metadata, is if you think about when I mint these things, they're generally in what's called an edition. So I might have an edition of 500 of these stickers. So there's a level of scarcity that's implied there. And some people pay more for one of 500, and 13 might be their lucky number, is 13 of 500. So being able to identify not just the edition size, but what's the number within the edition is helpful. And so I think if you start with those, it works out pretty well. I think also the right attitude. Don Norbury, who's our head of studio, has a great way to talk about this, folks. Like, no, you create these assets with our tools, but you own the IP. You're basically letting us use the assets that you've created. And so once you sort of shift to that sort of creator first mindset, I think it's super helpful. So now you've got content that's created and it's out there. Just making sure that when you go to different chains that you can track the royalties that are there. And also understanding that user-generated content can be combined, right? And so you might want to say that you're going to build a skin, and these 2 stickers can go on the skin, right? And so if you put those 2 stickers on the skin, and so imagine you create a sticker, I create a sticker, and Don creates a skin, and our stickers go on that. Well, we want to, first of all, we want to allow that to happen or not. And if we do, we want to make sure we get a piece of the pie, right, when it gets sold, and part of the royalties on secondary sales and things. And so there's this notion of what's called a royalty split. And so you say, okay, hey, I want to make sure that when this is sold, like the game will get a little piece. We'll have Jamil and Mark will also get their piece for this, and then Don, who made this, will get some. And so and we have an algorithm that the team has been putting together that looks at like how much of the surface area is contained by the different stickers to give you like the right split for when it gets combined and things like that. So there's a bunch of thought there, and just making sure that one, that you've got agency and it's portable and can be brought to other places. You've got the right metadata that allows people to sell it or use it in other games. A license that tells you how people can use it. And then making sure when it gets sold or resold that we can pay royalties out to the creators and have clear communication of what royalties were paid out for and why. And the last thing I sort of hinted at is having some level of moderation, so users can report. It's actually a much tougher problem than you might think. Definitely for me, so I spent a lot of time at Microsoft, right? And so Microsoft and Google and Amazon and others have these great image moderation tools, but they're almost entirely focused on images from pictures, right? If you think about a sticker or a skin, that's something that someone's designed, so it's more like art. And so they have really hard times finding, they had a really low success rate across the board, so it wasn't one versus the other, in finding things that we thought would be flagged as objectionable, didn't get flagged. And so that adds a whole level of overhead that you're introducing, both technical and people to moderate and flag.
Interesting. Overhead. I got to think about my follow-up on that. I want to pull up a quote that you said first. You said, our mission with GameBridge is to transform the gaming landscape by enabling game developers and marketers to easily deliver ownership, agency, and economic opportunities for players, creators, and themselves. How do you achieve it? But then how can the overall gaming industry, Web3 gaming industry, achieve that? Especially when there's like this overhead challenge.
Yeah, so the key thing is remove as much as the overhead as possible while also increasing the likelihood of success, right? And so this is one of the things I'm going to quote Don again, right? So he's talked about like Halo and Xbox Live. Unreal and Unreal Engine. These are two things where they really move the technology along, but in terms of the capability, like multiplayer, and whatnot. But the way that they did that was with a world-class game that really pushed the envelope to show how it could be done, right? And so the key thing here is you've got Shrapnel, which has people that are pushing the envelope to make sure that we understand, like, more. Basically, we're building more than most people will need, but everyone will want, right? And so the key thing there is, if you remove the friction, I mean, the key thing is, we think we're going to help people be like 90% faster, and an equal amount cheaper to deliver these solutions. So you can go much faster, much easier, and much more cheaply to add this functionality to your game. So it should be like a no-brainer for folks to just go and add it. And the way that you will go about it is in a way that's intuitive and is using the same tools and workflows that you're already using, which, being built inside of a game, it's not like an academic thing like, hey, I think they need this thing. It's like, no, we need this way. And like, we need to have this structure here. And there's a bunch of nuance that's there, right? And so it's not just that you have to build, a weapon that could be multiple parts and have multiple skins and stickers attached to it. That's part of an inventory. And those things can go into a backpack, which can also be an NFT. And there's capacity that it needs to have. And there's capacity that the weapons will take in that. And that goes into a loadout, which are things you're going to bring into a game. And you have to look at things like weight and the character. There's a whole bunch of things that are really game-centric, that when building it with a game, we've got sort of that baked in, right? And so you don't need to think about, like, what might be level 1 easy is like, here's how you mint an NFT, and so you don't have to do the minting code, but you still have to define the contracts. So that, you don't have to worry about that with us. We'll handle all that for you. And then you say, all right, well, we'll make it easier for you, and we'll give you something that's like a basic game item, which is just, here's a profile picture. Like, no, we're going to give you more advanced things than that. So at every click stop, we're probably like 7 click stops ahead of where anything is right now. And then just making it cheaper and easier to go land that. The issues I talked about with overhead for moderation of images, it's the same you'd have if you were doing, a creator tool in any game. It's no different because it's Web3. But at the end of the day, it's really just about, how do we enable creators to easily create these things that they can monetize, distribute them. And if you provide them tools to make money, and you only ask for a fair and reasonable amount to enable them to go do that, then you're going to have a flourishing ecosystem. If people who are buying things will actually get to own them and have agency with them, they're going to buy more stuff, right? Because it's not like they're not locked into an ecosystem, and whatnot. So if you really lower the barriers to entry and the costs and the time for the game developers, you'll see it show up more, and the creators will make more money, and the buyers will have more agency. So you end up hitting on all three participants there, that really are sort of the recipe for success, if you can make it easy. And so that's our goal, is just to make it really easy to get into the games in the first place.
All right. May I ask you about an industry challenge?
Sure. I mean, the industry challenge is that, and I'll tell you the challenge and the solution, right? Web3 is, whether you look at any major technological shift and opportunity, right? You can look at the internet. Lots of great things came out of that. There are also lots of scammers and other things like that were there, right? And so there's a bunch of things that happened in Web3 around gaming, where people may not have necessarily had maybe not have painted the best picture for what could be there. Right? It's like, oh, people are just selling profile pictures that are now $10,000 or something like that, and they really didn't provide, or the value they provided to games was less understood, and people thought it was just pure speculation and things like that. And so you see a lot of like NFT hate if you look at things related to games. The key thing, and I saw this when I was at Microsoft, we talked about people in the business context. You don't, like, when we talk about like Halo and Xbox Live, we don't talk about the magic of underlying network protocols, right? We talk about the fact you can now play with your friends, right? And so the challenge is that, and this, again, I've done a lot of stuff with early stage technology, so this is not an uncommon pattern, right? So the first thing is, let's talk about the hot new technology, because it'll get people to buy things. we're now at that sort of next level where you really start talking about the value in the context of what it allows you to do. So it's not about blockchain, it's about ownership and agency. So when you have, so if you say, hey, do you want NFTs in your game? Some players may be like, oh no, that's awful. And but it's an emotional reaction because you haven't really said what it's going to do. It's like this abstract thing that may have an attachment to something that has nothing to do with your game. So, but if you go and talk to folks like, hey, as a creator, would you like to be able to have like ownership and agency and bring your stuff to any game that wants to go use it on the blockchain and know that you're going to get paid? You can specify the royalties that you want to get and can enable other creators to do that and can specify licenses, and you can cash out to real money and things like that. I think the answer is generally going to be, well, hell yeah, of course I want to do that. But you don't mention blockchain at all in that statement. Blockchain is just an enabling technology, right? Similarly, if you said, hey, those items that you had and you played that game for like 5 years and you're kind of done with it, but you bought like thousands of dollars worth of stuff, wouldn't it be great if you could sell that to somebody else? Well, yeah, of course it would be. Okay, we can do that for you. Don't mention blockchain at all, right? It's really about what's the value that it delivers. And then if you said, hey, game company or game executive, if you're sort of pitching this to your game executive, you say, hey, gamers really want this, creators really benefit from this. If you could actually add a new revenue stream in a fair and reasonable way to enable people to do this, would that make sense for you? And the answer is, yeah, of course it would be. Again, not talking about blockchain, right? It's not talking about, and because when you talk about blockchain, there's emotional reactions that players or creators might have. And if you talk about a game, the game example is like, oh, that means I got to hire expertise and I got to staff expertise. And I got to learn all this stuff. And it's like, well, no, we can do that for you. Just plug in and it's like, oh, we're gonna have to change our workflows. Like, no, it'll work with the stuff that you have. So it's like, oh, but we have to think of these new concepts. Nope, you'll deal with weapons and cosmetics and other things. Oh, okay. Well, that seems straightforward. Why don't we just go do that?
I saw Tim Draper say this morning, which was like he was blaming the U.S. government for getting his price prediction of Bitcoin wrong, and then he said it's $250,000 is not where we're at because of the government. So I'm like, where are we at in the market stage? I think we're in between that place where it's we're at depression and anger, but we're also going to be headed upwards from here, and as we head upwards from here, you're giving people an opportunity to have NFTs in your game. Having people have opportunity of ownership. What do you see as the outlook for the gaming space in the next year?
Well, I think that I'm excited about it, right? I'm a bit biased, but what's nice is that I've been doing the blockchain thing for a while, for many years now, and the big thing is it's like anything else. You need like a best in class example of what can be done. Like going back to I talked about Halo 2, but just for Halo, like, so Xbox, I was at Microsoft when the Xbox came out, right? And the Xbox, it's cool. It's a gaming device, but when people saw Halo, like, oh, wow, that's really cool. And they saw Halo 2, oh, I can now do multiplayer. That's really cool. And that, as these consoles and stuff evolved over time, you just saw more and more things that just showed people what could be done, and they would sort of replicate that. And if folks were had the right mindset to make it available to other people, it would reduce the friction, right? So the thing for me, if I look at Shrapnel and Gamebridge specifically, I think Shrapnel is a great game. The feedback we've had from play tests and stuff has been great. And then the underlying infrastructure, I think, is going to be equally great. So if people see what's in the game and they say, hey, like, I'd like to do that, then having an easy path for them to go do that will be there. You just have more game developers plug stuff in more quickly. The other thing is that by like integrating with these gaming backends that they already use, you could also see it being added to games that already exist, right? And things like that. And so lots of opportunities that are there. And I think whether it's our game and there might be a couple other games in the space that folks are tracking that I think could show the way. And on that, like I say, like, hey, when we all win, we all win. And so I think just having more people out there that are showing people great games that provide people with agency or doing things in unique ways will just drive more games to get into it.
Awesome. That sounds great to me. So I want to thank you very much for your time today. This has been an enjoyable conversation. I appreciate it very much. I have one last question, and it's probably the easiest one. It's how can people find out more information about you, about Shrapnel, about GameBridge? How can they do that?
So if you want to stay up to date on Shrapnel, a great way to do that is go to Twitter. We've got @PlayShrapnel is our Twitter handle. You can also go to shrapnel.com where you could sign up for an account and have access to our sticker creator, we call our insignia tool. And then if you're looking to follow me, I'm at Marc Mercuri, like all together, no spaces, on Twitter. And then you can find me on LinkedIn too, where I post some things just about different sort of things we're looking at, problems we're solving, if folks are interested in digging in and learning a bit more.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Jamil, I forgot one last thing. We're now live in the Epic Game Store for wish listing. So if you want to check out the actual game, definitely go to Epic Game Store, search for Shrapnel. You can add it to your wish list. The early access will be out in December of this year, so just around the corner.
Sounds good. Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.